I am Amar Kapadia. I am co-founder and CEO of Aarna Networks. And I would really like to thank you for coming today. I know after the pandemic, it really takes a lot of time commitment to go to in-person events. So special thanks and again, a warm welcome. In terms of logistics, the restrooms are in that hallway over there. Water is back there. Today's topic is edge computing. And it's organized by Aarna Networks, by FalconX, which is this accelerator that we are in, and AvidThink. You'll hear more about AvidThink in just a second. You know, there's been a lot of buzz about edge computing. But like everything else in technology, it's taking much longer than anybody expected. So today the goal is to have a discussion. The group is small enough, so hopefully that'll foster discussion. And critically analyze the state of the edge. Really, we want to see what's working, what's not working, what are the accelerators, what are the inhibitors, are there pockets of growth, and why are those pockets growing? We have requested the speakers specifically to be authentic and share their honest views and opinions, and leave corporate speak out of the session today. With that, I would like to introduce BV Jagadeesh. Most of you know BV. BV is an entrepreneur turned investor philanthropist. So BV started Exodus and took it public back in the day. And then he was the founder of NetScaler, which was acquired by Citrix. He's now an active investor through Kaj Ventures and SV Quad. And his successes include Nutanix, Yodlee, Arkin, Elastic Box, Ocarina, Ankina, and I know that's just a partial list. BV is also very active in nonprofits. He's involved with organizations such as UVCE Foundation, One School at a Time, Akshay Patra, and again, I know that's just a small list of all of what BV does. Finally, he's a board member and founder of FalconX, which is where we are today. And BV, I've seen BV personally patiently spend a lot of time with very, very early stage companies and give them guidance. So BV, please help us kick off the event.
Thank you, Amar. Welcome all of you. Very nice to have you. This whole concept of this event, essentially we started to discuss almost like 6 months ago or so. We thought that a technology that is a futuristic technology is supposed to happen. That is where an entrepreneur makes the bet of starting a company, a venture capitalist or an investor makes the bet in that entrepreneur and in the problem they are solving to come together to make a bet on building a technology, a product, and of course taking that product to the market. That's where we believe that this product that they are working on, and also CloudBrink is another edge company that we are very closely associated with as well, which you will get to hear. Because of my own background of coming from solid networking for almost like 20, 25 years, this is the kind of things that we see in the future. And edge is a very important thing. And 5G is also a very, very critical thing moving forward. And you know, when you talk about 5G, a lot of people think that it is mostly the carrier, the communications that we all use in our phones. But I think it's much beyond that, because I think there is enough evidence and proof points at this point of time that we have already started to see where 5G proliferation into enterprises, into private 5Gs, especially in data centers and warehouses and manufacturing and healthcare and all of these places where I think 5G, private 5G, and edge networking, edge computing will play a very, very important role. And so that's the bet that we are making. And many of you here, Ajit Maya built an incredible company that he sold to VMware and became a leader in the SD-WAN space. And now we have Prakash Mana, who's building the next generation of the Velo Cloud. bringing edge applications almost at land speed. That's what you're doing, right? So fascinating entrepreneurs here, fascinating investors here, and I would love to welcome all of you. And as Amar said, we would love to see an authentic discussion. I think this is a great education for all of us to make the right decisions. And this whole conversation today is about thought leadership. And I'll just give a little background on FalconX, which is one of the companies that Krishna is here. Can you stand up, Krishna? And then about 9 of us who are entrepreneurs, and all of us have built companies from scratch to successful. Many of us have done multiple companies. And we all came together about maybe 2.5, 3 years ago or so with the sole intention of mentoring the next generation of entrepreneurs, because we felt as we were building companies, the biggest missing component was quality mentoring, especially people who have built companies, right? If you can get the mentoring from those kind of successful entrepreneurs, then you could avoid making the mistakes that were made in the past. Of course, you'll make new mistakes, which is okay, but make new mistakes. Don't make the same mistakes that were made in the past. And that's the whole intention of why we all came together. And we started this, and we have about 45, 50 companies under our umbrella. And all 9 of us, we spend significant amount of time working very closely with these entrepreneurs. And that's what actually gives us the energy. So we learn a lot from these young entrepreneurs. And if you guys have any companies, if you guys want to be part of this, feel free to talk to us. We have Anuja over here, Krishna, and myself. Every one of us is here. And we truly want to be a differentiated sort of a accelerator incubator. It's not like yet another plug and play kind of a thing, right? Because the biggest value is mentorship from people who have been there, done that. And with that, I'll welcome, and we'll kick off the program.
Our next speaker is my good friend Roy Chua. Roy is the founder and industry analyst at AvidThink, covering cloud, telco, and technology infrastructure. Prior to that, he was a founder of SDX Central, and he has had a long career in product management and product marketing before that. So whenever I need market insight and I'm confused about what's going on, Roy is my go-to guy.
I confuse him more, just to be clear.
So I mean this in all sincerity. Roy's breadth and his ability to synthesize both the business side and the technical side is unlike any other analyst that I've seen. So welcome, Roy.
Thanks, Amar. All right, thank you. Now with those words, it's going to be, now you set expectations too high, Amar. You should anyway. So, the 5G potato, yeah. Don't look up 5G potato. Now that I've said that, you'll go look up 5G potato, right, won't you? So as Amar says, I'm an analyst. I cover technology infrastructure. I've been in the industry for a little while now, probably too long. I didn't used to be on this side of the fence. I used to be on the other side of the fence. I used to be the entrepreneur side of the fence, but I found myself on the analyst side, which is a little refreshing and interesting, right? You get to see a lot of new technologies. So I think that's pretty cool. So I thought we'll start, talking about the edge. I think one of the things is the edge has been pretty hyped, and there's a lot of questions around. And Amar says, "Hey, Roy, can you talk about is the edge real?" Well, the fact that you're all here means probably the edge is real, because there's a lot of smart people here working on the edge, so it better be real, or we're all collectively wrong, right? So now, the next question is where, when, and where. So yes, there's a lot of smart people working on it. Doesn't mean it happens right away, right, as we know, right? And we tend to be, because we are entrepreneurs, because we all look to the future, we tend to be optimistic, right? And the question is, we're going to figure out whether we are optimistic realists or realistic optimists, and I'm not sure which category we all belong to, but we'll probably find out. And where, right? Where is the edge happening? So now, who are we? I'm not going to go through this slide. You can go look us up on the internet, but obligatory slide. And so the question, is the edge real? Let me move this way or the other way. It's kind of awkward, but anyway. And the answer is maybe, right? Maybe it's real. Probably it's real. We're all here gathered to talk about the edge, so it must be real, right? It can't be a collective hallucination, right? So, but before I start with the edge, I thought I'd talk about what's the edge, and I'm not going to try to define it. Linux Foundation does a better job than I do here, Rani, right? Yep, so LF Edge, I'm not going to compete with LF Edge. No one can compete with LF Edge in definitions, right? Or State of the Edge report, which I encourage you to download. I hope all of you have downloaded and read it already. So again, I think now Rani is happy, right? Okay, good. The edge is, I think, if not a figment of our imagination, but edge is definitional in the sense that the edge of what, right? You always ask, what's the edge of what, really? And I think if there was no cloud, there would be no edge. Because I think by definition, or more or less, the edge is the outskirts of the cloud. And so you need the cloud for an edge. And the reality for that is what we're seeing is the edge happens to be a set of locations that we think is pretty cool, right? On this left-hand side here, with the edge continuum, that happens to be part of a distributed cloud. Right? I think that's probably the best way to look at it from an analyst point of view. Right? And so we have the customer or enterprise edge, which is we used to call that the computer room, right? In your building, that was called the computer room. Now we say, that's my edge, right? And it could be a public cloud edge that the public cloud reaches in, or that's my private edge, right? Because that sounds cooler, makes it sound more expensive, so it's now called the edge. Before it was computer room raised floors, right? And that was what it was. But there is one difference, and that's why it's called the edge. The difference is previously you went in there by hand and you modified and you managed it. And now, most likely, it's orchestrated somewhere, likely from the cloud, which is now you can define as the edge. And I bet you we're going to call it the edge even when you disconnect the cloud, but use the same principles to manage it. It's now called the edge because it's cooler than calling it the computer room, right? So that's one element of that. The other element of the edge is in the network, and that's where, as BV says, 5G and some of the new and fiber connectivity comes in. So don't forget fiber, right? Because 5G is really, really cool. Fiber still delivers. Now it's harder to pull fiber, but 5G requires fiber too, by the way, right? It doesn't magically appear over the air, right? There's a cell tower somewhere nearby. There are limits to transmission, even with the work that we do with 60 gig and teragraph and stuff like that, which I know someone here is working on, right? Or used to work on and still works on. But regardless. So there's two edges that I think we'll talk about, but it's a continuum. And you could go all the way from the on-premises. You could say cell tower. We could put stuff there, even though I'm not saying that that's a big thing right now. You can go to the mobile switching centers or mobile switching offices or service aggregation point, depending on which carrier you are and what you call it, right? To your co-location, peering locations, Equinix, that's not really an edge as colo, but maybe it's closer to the edge if you're using fiber, right? So I think the continuum sort of stretches there, and certainly what we're seeing around the edges is a middle mile evolution, right? So past this last mile, this whole middle part, the edge is not just computing, the edge is a combination of computing and networking combined, and how you orchestrate that, how you make that happen, that's the magic of the edge. That's what I believe anyway, right? Okay, so if that's the edge, then there are two edges that we'll focus on for the time being because it's just easier that way. I'm not saying that putting compute at the bottom of cell towers and those telco sheds isn't a thing. It can be a thing, but there's two areas that we see more evolution at this point. First is the enterprise or customer edge, which is the thing that are on premises, or we call it the on-premises edge. And then those who don't care about grammar call it the on-premise edge without the S, right? But that doesn't matter which way you spell it, it's still the on-premise edge, on-site. The other one is the cloud or telco edge, which is in the network itself. And those are the two elements that we're seeing as evolution. So thank you. I have probably the highest end slide mover at this point in time, right? So it's a very high-end clicker. I don't think I can afford this one. But anyhow, so, but the other element around the edge, as BV said, is it's very hard to talk about edge and not talk about 5G. You almost have to, right? And 5G has all these promises that are in progress, right? And not all of it have been met yet. But it is in progress, And with 5G, both on the public side and the private side, you'll see that in a second, have awakened people to the promises of the edge as well, sort of simultaneously, right? And 5G promises a lot of things. Not going to go into detail. You can go read it. You can go look it up. Other people have described it much better than I have, right? But there's all these capabilities, and whether release 16 or release 17 or release 18 out there, right, that unlock all these capabilities, it's in progress, right? But in the meantime, there are real use cases that we are seeing starting, and I'll talk about a little bit more. With 5G and edge, and everyone has to throw in this word now, AI, ML, although increases the valuation of my slides by putting the word right there, right? Right, so, I mean, honestly, there is value, right? And people are actually getting real value from it, hype aside, right? And so what we're seeing is private 5G and edge is happening, right? And private 5G gives you better consistency, more reliable coverage, is true. And it doesn't always have to be private 5G, by the way. Private 4G LTE works just fine for the vast majority of use cases today, right? When you don't need that kind of capacity, when you don't need that, there's no such thing as sub-millisecond latency in the real world, by the way. So, no matter what they tell you, right? So, or maybe in some labs. But fundamentally, that 5G unlocks that connectivity in a lot of industrial locations where then your edge compute then comes in and does the computing, right? Because 5G is the connection to unlock your IIoT, industrial IoT applications, to unlock your Internet of Medical Things applications, right? It gives you that reliable connectivity. And then the edge comes along there and processes the data. Why the edge? Because many reasons. Latency. The data set is just too big, potentially, right? You can't deal with loss of connectivity to the internet, so you need to do it there. Sometimes there's data sovereignty or data residency reasons, so you can't move the data off. You got to do it right there. Or sometimes you just need that control, signal to come really quickly because your hand's going to get chopped up because it's a manufacturing process and it's not going to stop in time if it goes to the cloud edge, right? So various reasons for the edge, and that is happening. We are seeing real examples of that. Or all the vendors and all the carriers are telling me lies, so hyperscalers too, right? But so it is happening, right? So second one, public 5G and edge happening as well. Really interesting. But remember, public 5G and edge, ignore public 5G and put in wireline fiber, it also is valid as a use case, right? So wireline and edge. And the nice thing about that, it's like the cloud. It's there, it's on demand, it's pay as you go or pay as you grow, right? And you can put cool computing things there, like GPUs from our friends at NVIDIA, right, over there as a collective resource that you can tap into when you need it. And we are seeing use cases there, as well. Quite interesting use cases, from as mundane as, hey, I'm Netflix and I need to do some rendering, and let me just go over there and do some rendering and then get off it, right? So as mundane, not mundane, I guess it's pretty cool, but as a use case, right? Or I'm in a farm, agriculture, I can't put equipment down here for various reasons. I don't have a secure location. I don't have the power or cooling. Let's just use the edge over 5G, and I can have compute there. And it's close enough for my use cases, right? So pretty cool. So we're seeing some of that as well. And so, 5G, edge, AI, ML, or computer vision use cases, seeing a lot of that in both cases. So computer vision, things like cashierless checkout. So imagine your little sort of kiosk checkout. You have your video cameras, and you can put it at event centers and the like. It goes out into the cloud edge over 5G, and you have cashierless checkout. So that's actually happening, and there are real measured benefits. So there's actually been field studies by the CSPs with actual benefits of that, right? So obviously, your card gets bigger, people buy more because it's more convenient, right? We buy faster, right? That's the habit, right? Credit card makes you buy more, buy faster. Cashierless checkout makes you go even faster and buy more, right? So real use cases. All right, let's move to the next one. And so, question, what and where are leading edge use cases, right? So obviously we have the cloud, which is not the edge, right? And then you have the edge, which is the stuff below. There's sort of two edges, as I said, that are happening. One is the metro mobile edge, right, with public 5G and fiber. The other one is the on-premises edge with private 5G, generally speaking, or happy to use Wi-Fi too. Wi-Fi 6 and 6E is great too, right, with Wi-Fi 7 coming along. Or it can even be industrial Ethernet if you like, right? But we're seeing sort of evolution across both, different use cases, obviously. A lot of the private ones you wouldn't call edge in oh, the VM that we used to manage with vSphere is now running on a cloud adjunct, right? So now that's now the edge, right? So okay, cool, I guess that's the edge, right? But we're seeing that, and we are seeing a lot of use cases. So they come, I would say some of the early ones you can categorize into a couple of buckets. One is I need to accelerate my application and my CDN isn't quite cutting it because I need smart logic, right? There are things that IoT based, that's certainly happening. So IoT, IIoT, IOMT, seeing those use cases, right? And here and in here as well, both. Early XR, so AR, VR, right? So augmented reality, virtual reality use cases, we're seeing some of that. But again, full VR requires a lot of bandwidth and there's a lot of challenges with that. And so a lot of them are still tethered or also very, very local. But some of the AR use cases we are seeing with the edge, right, in both situations. It is happening. And then there's computer vision. We're seeing a lot of computer vision use cases. The AI, ML stuff, running inferencing for health and safety, for process control, right? That's happening. And there is actually one interesting example. They're using the edge, and that's actually a public edge, in Korea. Port of Ulsan, is they're using the edge to park container ships. Right, so they're doing the processing with all the LiDAR and all the IoT sensors along with all the CV computer vision stuff, right, of cameras, and it's processing it. And then the dock workers actually have a like an iPad, a tablet. They can see in real time what's happening, right, for parking a container ship, which turns out to be a pretty hard thing, right? And they're try to use AI to assist. So seeing like real world use cases across the world, right? Not just in the US, not just in Europe, but Asia also has a lot of use cases around those. So that's what we're seeing. That's what's happening in terms of that. And I'll leave you to read the text. I mean, you can get the slides after that. So, and then let's move on. So the next question that Amar says, hey, can you talk about when? Well, that's the hardest question of all in terms of, it's not a when, right? It's the how much by when. That's the problem. And that's what investors always want to know, right? BB's like, hey, how much by when, right? But he's a patient man, so I think it's good. But the edge is, starting from, what is edge to, hey, of course, edge, right? In between this, I didn't put dates. I put now, soon, and later, right? Because there is no dates. Because what's the problem here? So those numbers I put up there, are numbers that I make up as an analyst. So we don't count markets, generally speaking. We count on other people who are much better at counting markets than we are, like IDCs, the Gartners, and all the world. Those are real numbers they all come up with for the edge, right? That's 2022 numbers. So you go to different analysts that tell you it's 5. No, it's 25. No, wait, it's 50, right? And so what is it going to be by 2030? It's going to be 150 billion. No, 180 billion. No, 4 trillion, right? No, the 4 trillion number is from a respected analyst, and they include all the infrastructure. So they've wrapped the edge with the 5G infrastructure that powers the edge in there, right? So it becomes a huge number. Again, it's how you define it, right? And so, so I think the main context, I think more importantly, is the edge of what? Is the edge of cloud. What is cloud growing at? That one we can measure, right? And that one, I trust John Dinsdale at Synergy Research. I believe he does a pretty good job, and his team. And so it's 220 billion in 220 billion, I can't even say, in 2022, too many twos and zeros, sorry, get confused easily. And it's growing somewhere between 15 to 40% year on year, right? It's dropped, as you saw in the AWS numbers, everyone's tracking it, 40, 27, end of the world. That base is pretty big, 27 is pretty decent, but end of the world, right? But regardless, right, that's the context, right? And so how much of edge how much of that is going to be edge? I think that's the way to look at it. That's the context, right? So when is edge? I think now, as I said, some of these workloads, there is edge now, right? It's just how much. But there are real workloads. And I'm sure Jim will tell you that there are he sees real workloads out there in the startups that he works with, right? Soon, I think, so today, on-premises, IoT, some of the more obvious workloads. Next, I think we'll see more wireless edge, right? App acceleration type stuff. And retail healthcare, I think we'll see. But healthcare, I think that whole 5G surgery thing, I think it's a cool demo, but it's going to take a while. I don't know why we always talk about it. The same thing like the edge-powered self-driving car. I'm like, no, It's an autonomous vehicle. You know the definition of autonomous? It means without help, on its own, without the edge, right? I mean, like, edge goes away and all of a sudden your vehicle like blows up. It doesn't make sense, right? So there are some examples that you hear over and over again. And connected healthcare makes sense. Telemedicine makes sense. Remote surgery is going to take a little while, right? I mean, imagine the approval that you have to go through to get through that, right? So, but certainly. And then finally, we have an expert here who will tell you about CV2X, automotive. There is a long sort of foundation building, right? And that will take time. But when it pops, then it will pop. And at that point, the wireless edge makes a lot of sense. You know, having that stuff in the MSO, MSC, SAP, depending on which carrier you come from, whatever you call it, right? That's important because the latency is important, right? Using it to augment information on the road, you know, to give you additional information that's localized, right? High definition maps, you know, things like that. Absolutely, but takes time. Not tomorrow, right? Maybe next week, Ravi, right? Maybe, right? With his help, maybe next week. But that's what we're seeing, right? In terms of the now, soon, and later, right? And then with that, I probably should wrap up. I think I'm 2 minutes over time. Not horrible. So finally, how to edge? Not answering that, the panelists will. So with that, I thank you. Really appreciate it. If you have questions, happy to answer those as well. So thank you.
Now, whether we talk about cloud versus the edge, or we talk about Linux versus Windows, or Intel versus ARM, it always comes down to applications. It's all about the applications. Ultimately, the growth of the edge is directly proportional to the growth of edge applications. And the next panel is going to explore that topic. I'd like to introduce the moderator, Jim Brisimitzis. I got that right? I actually had to ask ChatGPT how to pronounce it. Yeah, I did. He did it. Yeah. Jim approved it. Yeah. So, so Jim's a good friend and a mentor for me. He is the founder and general partner of the 5G Open Innovation Lab in Seattle. And if there's anything about the edge or 5G that you would want to know, especially from an enterprise or B2B point of view, Jim's really the guy. Jim would have that information. He has deep insight, energy, passion, and we were actually part of the first cohort at the 5G Innovation Lab. Jim, I'm sure I just did a partial introduction. If you could introduce yourself and the panel, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Amar. Hello, everyone. My name is Jimmy B. As was mentioned, I'm the founder of the 5G Open Innovation Lab. For those that don't know, it's the software ecosystem that we're building for 5G. And as we'll get into today, there's this fundamentally large opportunity in the 5G world with Edge. We are backed by 18 corporate partners that include Microsoft, Intel, T-Mobile, Spirent, Nokia, Ericsson, and others. And we've had, including Aarna Networks, we've had now 101 teams come through our program. Those teams have raised collectively $1.641 billion. So when they said pigs can't fly in the world of telco, they can. We're going to dig in why the edge is going to play an important role with that. So I would like to invite our esteemed panelists up to kick off our session for today. First, we'll invite Shah from Meta. Thank you, Shah, for joining. Then we'll invite up Ronnie from NVIDIA. Thank you, Ronnie. Any seat, yeah, feel free to. Ravi from Harman. Thank you, Ravi. And then Sunit from Ataya. Awesome. And before we get into our questions, maybe, Shah, we can lead with an introduction of yourself.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Hi, everybody. Should I stand up? Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Shah Rahman. Very pleased to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Amar and Jim. I'm here today to talk about a little bit on this, topic you can see, and any insights I can share. We've been warned to actually really focus on insights and not other things. Way of introduction, I'm from Meta, a group called the Connectivity, which has recently been disbanded. And we've done a lot of work with the industry across various different technologies. Prior to that, I'm a network and telco native for last over 2 decades, close to 25 years. Large companies like Cisco and Ericsson, and a couple of small startups. That's all.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Ronnie Vasishta. I'm at NVIDIA. Been at NVIDIA now for about 2.5 years. and responsible for everything telecommunications and telco at NVIDIA. I was at Intel before NVIDIA for a couple of years. I was founder, CEO of a company that I sold to Intel in 2018. And at Intel, we really, I think, started that move to virtualized RAN and the RAN infrastructure. And the company that I had before that, we worked very closely with network equipment providers that were obviously providing proprietary-based equipment into the RAN infrastructure.
Excellent. Puneet?
Hi, everybody. Thanks. My name is Puneet Sethi. I'm with Attaya. We're focused on building connectivity, software-defined connectivity platform for private networks. And before Attaya, I was running the RAN business at Mavenir and actually building what Ronnie just mentioned, disaggregated virtualized RAN implementations. Not working?
Take that other one.
All right. Okay, maybe a quick repeat. So my name is Puneet Sethi. I'm with Attaya. We're focused on universal connectivity platform for private networks. Before that, I was with Mavenir, running the Open RAN business there. So basically building virtualized RAN implementation on COTS hardware, Intel. What Ronnie also mentioned in his introduction, we kind of were the leader in that space. Before that, I was running the infra business at Qualcomm for about 15 years. Before that, few other jobs, all in radio access space.
Thank you, Puneet. And Ravi?
Hello, everybody. I'm Ravi Puwala. I'm the VP of Strategic Partnerships at Harman. Harman is a fully owned subsidiary of Samsung. We are all about bringing the edge and the applications into the automotive world. Hopefully, by the end of this panel discussion, I can portray a picture of how some of the $4 trillion market feeds into the automotive market.
Well, we're going to get to that. So we had a great explanation overview from Roy on what edge is, but I'm curious to get your perspectives on the edge. So let's start with that. Yourself, Shah?
My perspective on edge. I believe edge is, I would say, you can look at it from two perspectives. One is like an extension of cloud. So how do you really extend the cloud compute and ability to run workloads closer to the user, so to speak, right? And especially, and the question would be like, why do you really need to do that? Usually that's for a couple of different reasons. One could be that you have latency sensitive applications or something that have very hard latency constraints that you really can't go all the way to the cloud. You just don't have enough latency budget because there is an best effort internet between cloud and the user, right? Or you can also look at it from the other perspective, which is more from the user or the client perspective, where you may be constrained because of, from a compute or thermal or power, what have you. So in those kind of cases, you may want to offload some of your processing from your local nodes over to the edge, right? So that's sort of like the two ways that we think about edge. Like it's a kind of like a, I don't call it a marriage, but more like a midpoint or like an intermediate point between your server side or client, the cloud processing and the local / your device processing. That makes sense.
It does. Do you think from your standpoint, edge is here already?
Edge has been around for a while.
Yeah. One of the points.
It really depends on like how you look at it and how you characterize it. And I think John did a great job in terms of really pointing out the enterprise. Enterprise has been on-premise, all the things that you run on your campus is an edge, right? It's been around for a while.
Yeah.
So it really depends on how you define, and LFEdge, their taxonomy and the definitions make a lot of sense. But when you start thinking about 7 or 8 different types of the ones that I did, in my team's analysis, it started to get really complicated. Like, what do you really call edge, right?
Right.
But the short answer is that I think it's been around for a while.
When you were explaining compute in a closet, we used to call that Microsoft branch computing. So the old is new again. Ronnie,
exactly.
How does NVIDIA consider the edge? So much of what you do in your platforms and capabilities is about, I would say, use cases on the edge. I'm curious to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, sure. So I think the edge is compute infrastructure connected, and we just heard great analysis of why it has to be more on-prem or closer to the end user. you know, from an NVIDIA perspective, of course, we have based accelerated compute and the connectivity at the things, the foundation of everything that we do. And if you look at some of the applications that are becoming more ubiquitous, whether it be intelligent video analytics or factory automation and robotics, if you look at some of the data requirements to stay on-prem and data science that needs to happen on that data, and the acceleration of the data science, you know, those applications are already starting to grow dramatically. And you know, there's always, I can't remember the number, but there's always a large amount of new data being generated every day that needs to go through either video analytics or some form of data science. So from our perspective, we have platforms that can accelerate that compute, can add AI into those workflows, and can make those latency feedbacks often much faster than they have been in the past. But what's very important is often that workload should be cloud native in the way it can run either at the edge or can be offloaded into the cloud, or vice versa, offloaded to the edge. And so the cloud native approach is also critical in all that we do.
One of the other critical components is connectivity as part of all of that. Puneet, this is a softball into you, my friend, but obviously connectivity is going to play a role in extracting that data, getting it to a point where it can be computed and so on and so forth. But I'm curious to get your perspective.
Yes, thanks for the softball. So I think that's a great question. That's what kind of think about this. That's a problem we're trying to address as well. And I kind of like the slide that Roy presented, and it kind of helped clarify some of the things in my head too, right? If you just kind of divide the edge into three, you know, I look at the slide in kind of three main categories: on-prem and telco edge, within from all every edge that extends from after the on-prem all the way to the telco network, and then sort of part of the public cloud, right? The edge of the public cloud. So if you kind of start to think about that, the on-prem edge, we talk a lot about 5G as an enabler of that, but that is really because we're talking about latency sensitive applications, and we believe 5G is going to solve some of those problems, and there are good challenges that 5G will address. But a large part of these on-prem applications that exist today, as they become cloud native, they're going to need to talk to all different kind of devices that access those applications, not just via 5G, but via wired connectivity, via Wi-Fi, via weightless, via LoRa, NB-IoT, all these things. These on-prem applications, as they become cloud native, they will become, they will be part of this edge addressable market, and probably a larger addressable market than 5G edge application. So we have to think about those connectivity platforms as you're now wiring these devices to the application, whether it's a SCADA application in industrial shop floors, or these are enterprise applications hosted on Microsoft Cloud. You have to start thinking about how you software define the connectivity between the endpoints, PLCs in the industrial shop floors, or computers to the. You have to define that in a software way, because there are no wires that industrial companies can rely on. So that's a big piece of that. The telco edge, I wanted to just say one more thing on that. I think a large part, we keep talking about the telco edge, this is the compute infrastructure deployed at the site or in the telco data center, or if telco is leveraging public cloud as part of that, right? So the primary use case for that really will be the telco workloads, because one transformation that's happening with 5G in the telco space is that the telco workloads are becoming cloud native, starting from RAN, baseband implementation, CUD implementation, to packet core, to management system. Everything is a container. So that's the only use case I see there, because the consumer apps cannot really be hosted there, because all the the life of the packet is encrypted until it kind of gets out on the other side of packet core. So those are kind of my views that I thought a little bit on top.
Oh no, thank you and Ravi, I'm going to come to you in just a moment, but we had a really good early debate us and Shah about what is the killer use case. Shah, obviously you led with Metaverse. That's it. It's the Metaverse. Explain. I'd love to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, definitely. I think at the present time, it's really difficult to kind of describe a killer app because, as you just hinted, that what's happening on the... So I think we have to separate the couple of things. One is the enterprise edge. Enterprise edge has its own use cases, which are very enterprise specific. It could be video conferencing, it could be your local filer, it could be a local RCS and whatnot, right? That's a different set of use cases. I think what we're talking about, the killer use case here, is more on the telco or the public cloud. So public cloud players started rolling out their edge ambition. If you think about Snow family from AWS, or if you think about the Outposts or local zones from the big threes, all of them now offer that, right? Or Anthos from GCP. I can just go on and on. There's so if you think about all of them, maybe your question is, what's the killer use case for those, right? And the answer that I see is it doesn't exist, right? It just doesn't exist today. So if you think about the telco edge and what you described are really self-serving. I think that's what we were discussing earlier. So what you're doing is that you're on a transformation. If you go back 10 years, almost every part of the network was very hardware-centric. We were pulling in big fat hardware boxes, and the sizes kind of grew as the level of aggregation grew into the network, right? So you start with a very small box at home or on-prem. You go into the CO, it gets bigger. You get into the edge, it gets bigger. As by the time you go to the internet core, you're looking at multi-rack systems, right? Yeah. So that's sort of like how a hierarchical network that's been built for the longest time. Now, in that scenario, today, over the last 10 years, gradually, we started moving towards a virtualized environment, right? I met with a couple of SD-WAN folks here. SD-WAN was one of the leads into that entire NFV movement. The workload just moving to virtualized environment or x86 kind of machines. And then you started seeing the control plane moving into the cloud, right? That was a few years ago. Now, what you describe, every workload is now containerized, right? Which is true, maybe not every, but most of them are. So you think about RAN, with Open RAN got disaggregated completely. DUCs can totally run in container, maybe not RU. Packet core alike. You think about any other network functions, they can all run containerized now, right? So but to me, those are very self-serving because what you're doing is that you're bringing efficiencies to your network. You're probably reducing your total cost of ownership, and you're reducing the cost. But you're not able to run a real workload or application that is outside of the telco domain. So someone like, things like remote surgery, like autonomous vehicles, the world that I live in, I'm from a social media company, right? So the stuff that we run, all these use cases, I would say when you see some of those start running in edge, maybe that's when we'll find the killer use case and you let into the metaverse. The reality is that we have some of the glimpses of metaverse experiences. It's certainly, there are very interesting things that can happen with the metaverse. The defining characteristic is the presence, the feeling of presence that everyone sitting in this room, we're feeling each other's presence. But that's not the case if somebody dials in from remote today, right? And the Zoom fatigue, and you see all these big boxes. How do you get to a point where people thousands of miles away, you still feel very close to them? We're not in that world yet. It has a lot of, long ways to go to the road to metaverse. So I would say the killer app is not here yet.
What's interesting is many of the CSPs in their pursuit of monetization are looking for that silver bullet killer app. And I would argue it's apps at the end of the day and the services, but they haven't gotten there. One of the oldest industries that's been in edge computing now for decades has been the automotive industry. You're the expert in this, my friend. I'm not, but at one point I read that cars on average today, more modern cars, are generating north of 300 gigabytes of data a day, and yet the automakers aren't able to extract that data to make sense of it. I'd love to get your perspective on how Harman is trying to help. Well, rather, how is the OEM automotive industry trying to leverage what is promised with computing and apps and all this other fun stuff to better their experiences?
Yeah, sure. At Harman, we have a motto. It's called consumer experiences, automotive grade, right? So all it means is that we're trying to change how we can provide premium situational awareness and premium audio to the consumers. If you look at most automakers, right, they make a claim they're going to make $20 billion by 2030 from the consumers, right? And if you take the average of the top 20 car makers, that's, you got your $400 billion market that the industry is claiming. But we're not there yet because we're still laying the foundation of ensuring that every car has a 5G modem. And we have the ability to deliver that experience to the consumer, right? So it's the biggest claims that the car makers are making. And, and it's the intermediate play of the multiple players, whether it is the mobile operators or the edge infrastructure players, sort of setting up the, the framework in order to enable these experiences.
Interesting. So controversial question for you all, since we're being authentic. Do the telcos play a role in this ecosystem beyond connectivity?
So let me kind of address that. Also, maybe by way of that same answer, put a counterpoint on that, the self-serving thing that you mentioned. I think so. Telco does play a role. I think in the way of driving this. I know. If you look at Roy's slide, what I call the telco edge, all the the columns between the on-prem and the public cloud edge is what I'm referring to as telco edge. The real and the use case there really is not going to be consumer apps, because the packets, the user traffic continues to remain encrypted as it.
Can you hold the mic closer to your? There you go.
Continues to remain encrypted as it flows through the network. The actual applications for that edge would be as the telco network evolves. The RAN workloads, RIG, packet code, I mentioned that earlier. And the reason you think today, Shah, I think the reason I think you're saying it's self-serving, because you're viewing that telco owns that infrastructure and just loading their own cost. But I think there's more disruption than that, just that. If you continue to go in this direction, you're assuming that the telco owns the underlying infrastructure. It doesn't have to be the case. If everything ran to packet core becomes virtualized, you could have service providers that only have software, that are software companies, where the actual compute infrastructure is owned by hyperscalers, and they deploy a network that is served by workloads deployed on that, and that completely changes the game as to who's the service provider and who owns the infrastructure. So I think there's more there that can happen. So I think back to your question, I think telco does play a role. They're driving this innovation in terms of how their workloads are moving edge native, cloud native, and orchestrated by the same sort of the container lifecycle management and so forth. So that's, I think, is a key role in kind of driving the ecosystem forward and creating some scale behind this activity.
Excellent. Ronnie, Shah and I were chatting about application constructs, right? And are applications for the edge, do they need to be quote unquote edge aware, or are they just applications that look to the network for resources? How are you all thinking about where application building goes for the edge? Is it very much the same of what it is today with just a whole new resource pool to tap into, or something more complicated than that?
Well, it's definitely more complicated because the applications that we're talking about, some of them don't exist yet. If you look at maybe XR, which is augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality, headsets are just starting to come on the market now for consumer. There's some industrial applications that are starting to happen, and synchronization of those scenes to the real world, when those scenes being in digital twins often, that doesn't exist yet today. Some part of that application will stream from the cloud or be running in the cloud. The digital twin perhaps will be running in the cloud. The orchestration of the synchronization between the real world and the digital twin, and relaying that information to the headset, either a downlink and then the uplink back to the RAN network. That will have to be at the edge, and that orchestration, again, is just starting to be worked on today, and we have some pretty exciting demos at Mobile World Congress that are showing these kinds of things now. If you look at some of the intelligent video analytics, that does exist today. intelligent video analytics. You mentioned earlier about in retail, for instance, there's some very exciting applications that have already been developed by a very large ecosystem of ISVs, and that infrastructure is primarily on-prem or close to the point of use, because you want to have real-time. Somebody walks out a store with something, you don't want to be able to look at it, 5 minutes later. So those kind of things are very dependent upon the application. I could go on. There's many new applications that are yet to come out. So going back to that early question about, I'll just answer one about killer app. I don't think there's one killer app that is going to make the edge or a deployment of compute hardware and infrastructure connectivity all of a sudden makes sense. I think it's just a rising tide of many of these applications.
And just to noodle on that for a moment, an open question for all of you. What's the killer segment? Who leans in first? Is it the enterprise? Is it consumers? Who leans in first? Ravi?
Yeah, as I said, the car makers already started to charge for the experiences. Recently BMW started to talk about how they're going to charge for the heated seats. The trend has already begun, right? It's all about setting the kind of the ground play about why you want to pay for your features, and the software-defined vehicle is creating that environment. People are going to be used to pay for new experiences in your vehicle. And as Roy pointed out about the autonomous, we are moving towards automated vehicles, right? Even the US government talks about automated than autonomous, because it's more about showing the dependence with the infrastructure. And when you have the dependence with the infrastructure and you have these experiences to be delivered, right? In the utopian world, you're sitting in a self-driving vehicle and you have nothing to do but watch TV or play games, yeah? So that's kind of the real reality, where the consumer will see the real need and why they want to make sure, you want to have the same experience as your home. So when does that happen, and when does the consumer feel it? That's kind of where we are in the middle of the reality.
Ronnie?
Yeah, I would say absolutely enterprise moves first, and campus. And that, if you bring it back to deployment over a RAN, for instance, it's just much more controllable and deployable, and quantifiable, the benefit in an enterprise environment. And we're seeing that with robotics and intelligent video analytics and even some XR experiences. Although I would say if you go to central London and you go to the Harry Potter experience, the David Attenborough Green Planet experience, or you go to Universal Studios and you have the Harry Potter experience, there you can walk around with augmented reality connected on 5G. But we still see that kind of more as an enterprise play than a consumer play.
Agreed. Shah?
Yeah, I'm just going to +1 on that, because I think that the experience that you're describing sitting in that car, I think is still years away. That's kind of my view. Even if we think about Metaverse or all the XR experiences that Ronnie was talking about, we are starting to see that the enterprise is a lot more receptive of those. There are productivity use cases. There are real functional use cases, whether it's like an architectural drawings or design creators, what have you. There's many use cases that enterprise are really clicking on, and they're actually saying that when do we get to use this, right? So which is a lot more pull than actually kind of like I'm sitting in the car, because we're with this generation, or even maybe the next, is still very used to be behind the the wheels and then basically drive that. So I think that's a little bit further away, but enterprise is like right here, right now. And as they start going into more XR and more metaverse type experiences, they are going to need the edge. And whether it's an on-prem edge or whether it's a rented edge from the telco cloud, the telco edge, or public edge from the cloud providers, whichever it's going to be, but I think the enterprise segment is going to move fast. Yeah.
Gartner would agree with you on that. They published a study, I think it was 2 months ago, that said 50% of enterprise data will be created outside of enterprise data centers, right? We have a startup, we have several startups in our batch, but one of them, actually when they do surveying of farmlands, they use LiDAR and other photosensing equipment. They're generating on a 5-acre block over 10 terabytes of data in a place that there is no connectivity, right? And so moving all that data and making sense of it in the public cloud doesn't make sense to them. And so they're kind of begging for edge computing and better connectivity to be able to process all that data and then just move the process data to where it needs to be. And that's where we think the edge is quite real. Puneet, last final words?
So I think I kind of agree with what Ronnie and Shah mentioned. I think the enterprise stuff is already happening. The other thing that I mentioned earlier, telco, is another area where this is also moving pretty fast. Big operators here in U.S., Verizon, they have thrown their weight behind this. All their new deployments are moving to be more virtualized, and sort of that's driving a lot of activity in this space as well. And then enterprises, as I mentioned earlier, especially with industrial customers, they have applications today that run on computers natively. They are these SCADA application, HMI applications, historian, all this stuff in factories and shop floors. They're making those cloud native, and all those applications don't actually need 5G. They already are served well with the connectivity options that exist today. So I think you're going to see as that momentum continues to happen, while we at the same time we're going to figure out how we deliver improved latency over 5G and enable some of these AR applications that the previous speakers talked about.
Agreed. Well, last open question, and we'll just take a quick answer from each of you before we wrap up here. There's a lot of effort going into the edge ecosystem, right? LF Edge has Kamara as a project. GSMA has their own edge computing project. How do we coalesce this? How is it all, in your opinion, guys, coming together? Is there a role for the hyperscaler, clearly working with the telcos, obviously driven by the enterprises? I'd love to get your perspectives. We had a great conversation on apps. I'd love to understand from your industry perspectives, where does the infrastructure actually play out? Shah, would you like to lead?
Yeah, sure. I think probably one thing we haven't touched on, there's a lot of talk about connectivity and telco from an edge perspective, as well as the data explosion. I think what you just described is going to make it very, very, very difficult to pull all that data. You're going to kill the network no matter how big the pipe is, and then think about the processing side of things, right? And we're also moving into a world where there is the whole privacy and security is coming into the picture, right? So one of the things we think about edge, and that's something making our life hard, is the notion of the trusted compute environment, right? So you need trusted execution environment, you need secure enclaves, you need not just the data security. If you start, he hinted something very important just a minute ago about you can't start executing things in the middle of the network because you have an end-to-end secure network. So you got to cut that open. If you cut that open, you have to extend that trusted zone, right? And you have to have that secure enclave, which is going to be a big problem. I just don't see enough of that in the industry. So if you ask me, I see that as a big gap. And right now, it's being talked in, kind of the world of differential privacy and federated learning in a whole different plane, which is like the hyperscaler and the cloud providers. There needs to be more work in that kind of area, because that, as soon as you find that kind of this wave of the killer apps, the next thing you're going to hit is that now we got to solve that problem. So we need to start thinking about that from an infra perspective. How does it become much easier to run, pretty much anybody's applications on anybody's infrastructure, right?
Yep.
That's the utopian world that we're looking at, and we're years away from that.
Totally
That's
agree.
all.
Ronnie?
Yeah, so I think what's making things a little bit complicated, a little bit busy, is the fact that the infrastructure, compute infrastructure, network infrastructure is coming now from multiple different vectors. So, of course, compute infrastructure on-prem could be a standard server, could be a NIC. Connectivity infrastructure could be Wi-Fi, could be Ethernet, could be RAN, could be 4G, could be 5G. Orchestration could be multiple different orchestration capabilities. And so I think that in itself, because everybody has a part to play or wants to play a part, is making things a little bit more complicated. I think in the cloud, things have settled down a lot more because there's major players that have, but not all clouds are created the same, right, in terms of the infrastructure that is within the large cloud service providers. So I think it's going to be a bit of a Wild West for a while. I don't think this is really going, because everybody wants to have a play in I think the ownership of that infrastructure.
Agreed. Ravi, final words, my friend. No pressure. We have to wrap up.
Right. Today, the automotive industry is driving these conversations in a consortium called 5G Automotive Association. Yeah. So there we define the near-term mobility applications and the long-term safety applications. Yeah. So we have a joint collaboration between the auto OEMs and the telcos through a working group called MEC for Auto. This is where we are kind of defining how this collaborative infrastructure is going to be deployed.
Yep, there's going to be a lot of that. Well, friends, it's been awesome. It feels like we had a beer here and we're just catching up. So thank you very much. We could probably go on for hours more, but we'll wrap up here. Amar, thank you for hosting us, and thanks for all the guests for spending some time with us and sharing your wisdom. We appreciate it. All right.
Thank you.
One of the cloud native principles is that you decouple the workload from the underlying infrastructure. For the edge, this principle does not apply. It actually breaks. Edge workloads are dependent on the nature of the infrastructure that's running underneath. And that's why you have to think of edge applications and infrastructures as a whole. The next panel is going to explore the world of edge infrastructure. I'd like to introduce the moderator, Sanyogita Shamsundar. Sanyogita is the head of Global Network Edge at Google. Prior to that, she was the VP of Product Strategy and Operations at Verizon, which is when we first met. Sanyogita, please introduce yourself and a panel as well.
Thank you. So I came here thinking I'm going to leave my telco past behind. But the past 45 minutes we've been talking about telcos and what they do for Edge. Just a quick introduction. I've been with Google for about a year, and like we decided, we're not going to represent our companies. We're going to be, impartially talk about the industry in general. So that's what I'm here to do. Prior to that, I was at Verizon for 14 years. A big part of my life there was leading all the 5G work at Verizon. So I'm still waiting for the $4 trillion market to emerge for the past 5 years. And I will wait. So as you can see, I have a lot of scars of that. And then I have been, with the semiconductor industry for a bit, and a little bit of optical work. I was with Bell Labs for a little while, so I've been in this industry for a long time. Have seen 4G, 5G, and maybe even 6G. So I'm happy to introduce my esteemed panelists here. Ashish Yadav. She's from Capgemini. Welcome. Kaladhar Voruganti from Equinix. Greg Tureski from Seagate, and Prakash Manna from CloudBrink. Yep. So before we begin, why don't we go around with quick 30-second introduction of yourselves. Let's start with Prakash.
Thank you, Sanyogita. My name is Prakash Manna. I'm co-founder, CEO of CloudBrink. CloudBrink, quick 15 seconds, we're delivering ultra-high performance, dark network level of secure in-office-like experience to hybrid remote workforce no matter where they are. As I was walking in, Sanyogita said that she's going to ask something unique or something special, yes. And that has put a ton of stress on me. I'm a pretty boring guy, just so you know. My favorite TV series is Captain Underpants. Wonderful series for any entrepreneur, especially during fundraising times. The level of silliness will make you laugh. As I said, I'm a boring guy. As I was walking out of my house, I asked my son that, hey, I'll be going out, anything special? He said, yeah, there is something special. I'll tell you this joke. So he was helping me out. Instead of saying something special about me, let me share that joke with you. I found it funny. We're about 2 hours late into this joke now. Okay? He asked me, what is the best time to visit a dentist? Any answers? No, what is a good answer? 2:30. 2:30.
I got it.
We're 2 hours late into the joke. It's 4:30 now, but that's okay.
Okay. My name is Gregor Turecki. I'm a Senior Director of Product Management at Seagate, working on something that not many people know about Seagate. We launched our own cloud services. So I work on cloud storage and compute offerings. I worked before that in a variety of large and small companies and around infrastructure and storage and compute and other aspects of data center and clouds, which is someone else's data center. From something interesting that you suggested us to talk about, I was thinking about me starting at Intel, something like 25 years ago, when I started my career. And they took me to the data center, and they showed me that with excitement that we just deployed the 3rd terabyte of storage in the data center. And that was like one of the largest Intel design centers in the world. Right, and if I think now about terabyte in my phone, that shows where we are now and where we're going in this area. So.
Thank you, Greg.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kaladhar. I'm a senior technologist at Equinix. Equinix, as you all know, is like the current aggregation point. Most, you name it, all the different networks, clouds, everybody aggregates at Equinix. So we are very active, actually, about the next edge, next aggregation point where it is going to happen. So we have definite interest there. Something interesting about myself, I love to teach robotics to young kids, grade 3 to grade 5 on Saturdays. And one thing I realized is that they have no fear. So when you give them a computer and you ask them to do something, they break the system right away. So like, for example, there's a for loop, they put 1 to 10 million or something like that. Right? I never in my programming world try to put 10 million in the for loop. Right? So that tells you their mentality, how they think, is very different, and I think that's very interesting. Yeah.
Ashish, thank you.
Hi, my name is Ashish, and I'm from Capgemini. I am responsible for partnerships and technical product marketing for SFS, which is Software Frameworks and Solutions Group, pretty product offering in a service company. And one interesting fact about myself, I also teach kids in India. So I'm sponsoring education for many kids in India, and when I'm visiting home, which is twice a year, I actually go and teach underprivileged kids. That's my passion. Thank you.
Well, thank you. So let's continue, I guess, the topic. And the last panel, right, in the last panel, we kind of concluded that the consumer applications are not here, or not here anytime soon, right? And I think we generally agree as a group. The telco world notwithstanding, there are few applications that kind of drive what 5G, some of the 5G features give you, right? Other than bandwidth, perhaps at this point. So let's focus on enterprise then, right? Enterprise seems to be the place where edge is important. We also saw from Roy's presentation and later on that the enterprise may have its own definition of what edge they want, right? Or what edge they prefer. And a lot of it actually comes down to ROI, right? Value. What are you bringing? Why should I put, and I think Shah referred to it a little bit, and so did Puneet. It doesn't make sense to have a high compute camera on the edge, a smart camera on the edge. Should I just do that? Or should I haul all the video back to maybe a near far edge location and do all the compute there, right? What does the business case look like? And that's a struggle at this point. That's not at all clear that one is better than the other. Where should we be as an industry for that to make sense is not clear. So I don't know if it is 5 years from now or 10 years from now. I guess we'll all collectively as an industry figure that out. And the cost structure is at a point where enterprise can make an easy sense. So Ashish, you deal with enterprises. Tell us what you're seeing from your enterprise customers. What are they? What type of infrastructure are they looking for? What are their puts and takes? What is the biggest challenge you're facing?
So I see enterprises more in a demo and testing lukewarm waters kind of state right now.
Mm-hmm.
You will see a lot of, like Roy said, I have to include AI/ML, and they also feel the same way.
Yeah.
So I see a lot of marriage between edge and all these AI/ML applications. They're looking more for data crunching in these applications using that data on the edge to give them the ROI.
Mm-hmm.
So you see kitchens that'll have sensors that can be managed remotely, or kitchens which have preemptive maintenance. So something that can give them use cases which can reduce their operations cost. That's what we see more towards use cases right now.
Okay, that's great. So then, Kaladhar, you are in an industry that is kind of in the middle, right? You, the prem is not very interesting for you, maybe not. How do you see the industry dynamics from your
Sure.
vantage point?
So with respect to edge, what we are seeing is, as you saw in the initial presentation, there's a continuum of edges, right from device, maybe the far edge, micro edge, metro edge, we call ourselves Equinix, and then the cloud availability zone. And what we're seeing is interesting phenomena is that I call it cloud out and edge in. Cloud out, what we're seeing is that the AI training, for example, is moving from the centralized cloud to at least metro level. Because these AI machines need a lot of power. Like we are seeing north of 30 kilowatts per rack easily nowadays. And people are asking for liquid cooling. But the cloud out phenomena is basically, I'll give you a very concrete example. So we worked with some airlines, and they're generating about 4 terabytes of data per plane per day. And now they don't want to move that data to a central location in Europe to do the training. So instead what they're doing is they're using federated orchestrators, and they're trying to do the training at the metro level where the data is getting generated. So that I call it as cloud out. But we're also seeing what we call as edge in. What an edge in is that for AI inference especially, what we're finding is that you don't need to have an AI stack in every one of your stores or every one of your gas stations, etc. You can move up in the edge hierarchy and go to like a metro level and get better CapEx and OpEx. And depending on the latency of your application, some, as they mentioned, real time, really, somebody is going to jump over the fence or something, you might have to do it at the far edge. Otherwise, for many other workloads we are finding, you can actually comfortably do it 10 milliseconds round trip in a metro edge. That works just fine. You get better CapEx, you get better OpEx, more flexibility in your AI pipeline because you can add new use cases, new AI models, no issues, right? And also privacy. Many times the security of the far edge is not real. Physical security is an issue. So you can actually do that at metro level edge and cloud. Yeah.
So what you're saying is that the infrastructure today can support applications that are, let's say, 10 milliseconds type of latency use cases.
Yes, in most metros.
In most metros.
80% of our US population, we are seeing that, we have reached there, yeah.
Okay. That's good to know. That's a benchmark that many times the industry uses, right? 10 milliseconds because the air interface gets better and better from a wireless perspective, but
this is the physical transfer.
Yes, the physical transfer.
Yeah, because you have hairpin effects with different network providers.
That's right.
That adds latency.
That's right. Let's get there. Let's get to that a little later. Yeah. When you talk about multiple operators, multiple telcos, and multiple enterprises, and multiple clouds. Application supporting all of that infrastructure and working across that infrastructure has another set of challenges. So let's table that for a second. Greg, you are looking at this from the storage vantage viewpoint. How are you seeing this industry differently, or the challenges differently?
Yeah, it's actually bringing quite a lot of new points of view on storage and data processing. Right, something that was mentioned about data privacy and data collection. Your autonomous car collects a terabyte of data a day. It knows exactly where you've been during this day and knows where you go and how much time you spend in different places. You bring this car to a service center or to a garage. Do you want the service person in this garage to get this information about you? How do you protect this, right? How do you set access controls, and how can you process this data within the car and make sure that only people, applications or people who can access the data can really access it and not somebody else? How can you transfer this data from those far edge stations, vehicles, seismic stations that we have and so on, into the edge and maybe into the metro data center, into the cloud? How do you ensure that the data that was transferred between different stations is staying intact and you can generate some kind of fingerprints of the data and make sure that it's the same, not modified. Right. So all those challenges are very new and growing in this area of the edge storage and edge data acquisition and transfer and processing.
Yeah. That brings me to thank you. That brings me to CloudBring. You know, you kind of play in all of this, right? As an infrastructure provider. How did you see this journey evolve the past 3 to 5 years since you've been out there, I guess?
Yeah, thank you. You see, our perspective has been slightly different. Experience has been very different. My past experience was I've held chief product officer, other roles in infrastructure security industries before. So when I went back to the same group of CIOs or infrastructure leaders or CISOs and stuff, the moment I would bring the word edge, if it's in a casual setting, people will say, time out. We have barely understood how to spell cloud. Now don't throw this new curveball at us. Right? So if we take this term out, and if we look at some of the stats that you talked about, right? Today, 84% of enterprise workforce lives no more than 7 to 20 milliseconds away from a closest compute, whether we call it edge, whether we call it cloud. It could be the Google Cloud, it could be the AWS Verizon 5G wavelength compute, whatever it is, right? When we start looking at those kind of stats, we play in future of work. I was recently in a future of work summit. And in that, the CIO group concluded that the single most profound shift that enterprise is facing right now is to how to get best out of our people when they are working anywhere they want to work from. And technology should make it all possible. So I think when you start looking at it from a use case perspective, the idea is how do we deliver the level of experience that people want, that intimate experience. In this particular case, hey, when I'm inside the office, I'm able to access all applications securely, all of that. How should I be able to do that when I'm working from home? Similarly, when you talk to I was talking to a pharmaceutical company. They are moving into telehealth. So their whole point is that how do we make sure when a patient and a provider is hopping on a call that both parties feel like they're sitting in the room, there is a real-time experience, all of those things. So I think it's when we start looking at it from a use case point of view, bringing applications so intimate to end user that you feel like you are engaging with the application in real time makes all the difference.
I think this goes back to the discussion that we were having in the previous panel, right? One of the driving use cases, going back to the consumer, maybe this spans consumer as well as or B2B2C type of a use case, is the immersive communication, right? But the extreme of it is probably VR, Metaverse, but even a 2D. How can I make it better, right? And that requires some additional processing, additional intelligence, and perhaps at the edge or perhaps not, because I mean, if you strictly look at the latency requirements for something like a video communication or speech, I mean, it's not that it's not that stringent, right? I would say it's for a call it was like 100 or 200 milliseconds and we were still fine. But some of these applications will require better. But is 10 milliseconds good enough? 20 milliseconds good enough? Or do I need to go much lower than that, right? So I think that's the point. Going back to the things that you're seeing, Ashish, yes, they are mostly proof of concepts. A lot of stuff today on Edge is proof of concept. But if you go to the next step, let's say 2, 3, 4 years from now, some of these things start getting real. What do you see as some of the challenges of managing this infrastructure? I think he touched upon it a little bit, and Prakash also touched upon it a little bit. Like, how do you make these applications work across multiple domains, right? What do you think?
I see two things here. One, with Edge coming closer to the user in businesses, it has moved away from protection of the data centers. So security is a challenge that I think everybody is trying to pick up on, and we are seeing solutions where you have something like EOS and all those kind of things that are coming up, which have controls on the cloud and not on the edges. That's certainly something that's evolving, and we'll see more challenges as we go and deploy. And the second part is how do we touched it in the last panel as well, that how do we make all these interfaces even? Right now, from edge to edge, you have certain forums that are doing the communications. So you have northbound, southbound, so many interfaces and so many different forums that are trying to channelize it. So how do we ensure that communication is flowing between applications and developers see that as a seamless communication platform? So that's another challenge that I see will.
So do you see an opportunity there?
Absolutely. I think somebody will emerge as an next ORAN for Edge, and that's definitely an opportunity. You are it.
Kaladhar, you are in the unique space of working with the telco providers, the cloud providers, providing that critical infrastructure connectivity to all of them. When you talk about applications that can work across multiple telco providers, operators, especially connecting to a edge, let's say we get to a point where there is a single edge that can serve multiple operators. I don't know when that's going to happen. Maybe that's when we need to have a cloud provider that can also work with all of them and well with each other as well. So I think there are multiple layers of, let's just say, how do we get there? What are the opportunities you see in the meantime?
Yeah. So currently, definitely the aggregation point for networks and clouds it's happening at Equinix pretty well globally. But now the whole question is now it's all about data. How much data aggregation is required for these next generation applications at the far edge? And I think because you will have, as you correctly said, there will be MECs that will be managed by different quote-unquote NSPs or CSPs. I think there will be some battle about who will monetize that. That's a separate question. But I definitely see that for new use cases that require data aggregation, right, you will need more of a neutral type of location that is closer. Because bilateral agreements between CSPs and NSPs will not cut it, in my opinion. Because so that is the first thing. You will need some kind of neutral aggregation point. And secondly, I think you will need people like Aarna Networks, etc., to orchestrate between these different MECs in a seamless way. And either it's through standards, because I don't think that single CSP or cloud providers or NSP, their APIs will do the job. So I think both you need a need for a neutral aggregation location as well as orchestrators that will be standards based that can kind of unify all of these.
Yeah, this goes back to how the cellular industry, wireless industry evolved, right? So there's the neutral host in things like stadiums and indoor DAS systems that kind of provides that neutral host, but everybody has still their own boxes in there in the telco closet. And then on the tower side, there's American Tower, which is a common infrastructure for all the different service providers to hang their antennas on, right? Will that continue to go down or go up the stack, however you want to look at it, where you start providing common infrastructure for multiple different cloud providers, and then the next step would be the data that you aggregate and orchestrate across the different providers. So there's a lot of things to unpack there.
Yeah, definitely. I think data sharing, a lot of increasingly people want data from other folks to improve the accuracy of their algorithms, but the providers don't want to give you the data.
Yeah.
So they want federated systems, federated AI or learning systems where you bring the compute to data instead of taking your data to some compute. Otherwise, privacy will be compromised.
Yeah. Okay.
I just have 3 quick slides on our perspective, or my perspective on the discussion we had. So first of all, where is the edge growing? And as an edge orchestration startup, this is not an academic question for us. This is a question of survival. If you get this wrong, we're gone, right? And is Rani still here? Oh yeah. So let the record show that a lot of people talked about LF Edge diagram. I'm the only one who's showing it. So you have the user edge, and then you have, they call it the service provider edge, LF edge, but you can call it the cloud edge or the network edge. We are seeing slow growth in the user edge, on the on-prem edge, and we are seeing rapid growth on the cloud edge or the network edge, or you can also, in the networking speak, Roy said middle mile, right? You can also call it the middle mile. So next, so why is that? There are three reasons for that, or three use cases that we see. First is multi-cloud networking. People who are at data centers and colos want to connect to multiple public clouds through dedicated connections. We are seeing that. SD-WAN vendors who are terminating at a colo now want to offer connectivity to public clouds to their customers. So we are seeing that. And this is not a networking problem. You have network functions, security functions, SDN. So you need compute, storage, and networking. So it's a full edge experience. The second one is machine learning. I'm also trying to raise the valuation of my slide. but I think this is real. So video analytics is real. We are seeing, you have two options today. You can run things on-prem, which is very expensive. You have to buy these GPUs and make them work, and it's very, very difficult for an average enterprise. Or you go to the public cloud, where you can push the easy button, but now you have to haul massive amounts of data to the public cloud, and a lot of times it's just impractical. So the cloud edge is emerging as a very attractive place where you get the simplicity, ease of use, on-demand, self-service, access to AI, and you have the bandwidth to move your data there. And the third one is storage repatriation. 80% of global 2000s will use 4+ hyperscalers. That's a report, according to one report I saw. And so the state has to be in a neutral site. If you put your state in one public cloud, the egress costs will kill you to access it from another public cloud. So the state has to be in a neutral site, and the state is, in this case, is storage. So you can have primary storage, secondary storage, all of that in a cloud edge is quite attractive. So those are the three things we are seeing. What you are not seeing is 5G workloads, and deliberately we didn't put it because it's not happening today, and this is happening today. Okay, last one. So this is a little bit self-serving. As an orchestration company, obviously we think orchestration can accelerate growth, but why do I think so? So you have three problems of scale, massive scale going on. You have tens of thousands of locations. So whether you take Walmart stores, you take Starbucks, you take towers, American Tower, something, tens of thousands is not a big number. And then you have some number of network or cloud edge. As Kaladhar said, it reduces in number. And then you have very few public clouds. And then your applications, whether they're network services or edge computing applications, span from edge to cloud. And there are hundreds of these. And then the last thing is the number of heterogeneous vendors. So I compare the cloud to a departmental store. It's owned by one company, it's consistent, it's orderly, it's a great experience. You go to the edge, it's a bazaar. If you look at the number of compute, storage, networking, Kubernetes vendors at the edge, it's in the tens. So when you take all of this together, I think, Kandan is still here. So one of the open source projects we are affiliated with is Nefio, which was seeded by Google. And in the Nefio community, we discuss it sort of as a 100x problem. So with that, I would like to conclude the formal portion of today's session. Thank you all for coming, and I have a quick shout out to Anuja, who has really helped tremendously with all the arrangements, and with Jim Carroll, who you have not been able to see because he's been behind. He's helped with the AV. So with that, please enjoy the refreshments, network with your peers, continue the discussions, and if you have questions for me, feel free to ask as well. Thank you.